Welcome everyone once more this evening on Njenje Media TV. As usual, we will have a conversation this evening, being Friday, the 12th of March, 2021. My name is Mazi Ezoke. And this evening I have a guest, a person you all know. He's been in the scene for so long, and he is what the Nigerian system will refer to as a technocrat. My guest this evening on the one-on-one conversation today is Professor Kingsley Moghalu. Professor, good evening.
Good evening, Mazi. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Moghalu, for many of you who do not know, is a Nigerian. He is a political economist. He is a lawyer, a former United Nations official, and he's also recently become a politician. He served as deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, appointed by President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua from 2009 to 2014. Professor Moghalu is the author, Build, Innovate, and Grow: My Vision for Our Country. That's what the book is called. Professor Kingsley Moghalu, once more, welcome to the conversation. May I throw the first question to you, because obviously I understand that time is not our friend here. You contested the last presidential election in 2019 under your former party, the Young People's Party, YPP.
Young Progressive.
Since then, somehow you resigned from that party and you have moved into building a grassroots movement. So how has life been since then? And what are you currently doing, Professor?
Well, thank you. Presently, I am serving on a high-level international assignment as the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, Special Envoy on post-COVID development finance for Africa. I am the president of a think tank called the Institute for Governance and Economic Transformation. And I also run a global strategy and risk advisory firm called Sogato Strategies. Since the elections in 2019, obviously I've had time to reflect, and I've had time to take a very good look at Nigeria and the experience of that election, and to try to see what lessons I could learn from that whole experience. As you may know, I was not a natural politician, if you will, and I don't really consider myself a politician, but I'm a leader. That's what I see myself as. I'm a transformational leader. But in a democracy, or what we want to believe is a democracy, you can only get into elective office through a political process. And so, of course, I had to go into a political party and to contest the elections. I left the party about 6 months after the elections because I realized from the experience of that election that the fundamental problem challenging democracy in Nigeria is the electoral process. The electoral process is not transparent. The electoral process does not empower the Nigerian people. It has many loopholes for fraud and for rigging. And of course, the elections are not conducted in a secure environment most of the time. So I decided to, focus on a citizens movement called To Build a Nation, TBAN. We call it T-BAN, and for us to campaign very strongly advocating for electoral and constitutional reforms. So that's one of the things that has really taken my time. And we're making progress because we know that the National Assembly is considering the reforms of the Electoral Act, and we're hoping that they will be through with it by June. at the latest. That's our hope. And we're trying to make sure that Nigeria's elections use electronic transmission of vote counts from the polling booth to INEC databases. We're trying to make sure that people who live in the Nigerian diaspora and bring home $25 billion every year, that they can be able to vote from where they live, whether it's through the embassies or whatever. So these are the kinds of things. We're trying to expand democracy. And of course, one of the biggest lessons I learned from that whole experience is that the Nigerian people have been captured and enslaved by the traditional political class. So they worship their oppressors. And so this requires a lot of education of voters so that people can be able to make independent choices. So here I was, making a lot of sacrifice, and I'm very glad that I did it. And, I'm really have no regrets. But you find that because of the nature of the electorate, the poverty has been weaponized. And so politicians can come in and distribute stolen wealth. They'll steal your money and then come and give it back to you at elections, and then you vote for them. So these are some of the reflections that I have. There's a lot of education that needs to happen.
So are you very confident that the level of engagement you're now doing through the National Assembly would see these electoral reform come to fruition before the next general election?
We certainly hope so. I think INEC has expressed a strong willingness, to really fundamentally, or at least significantly, improve its operations. It's now with the National Assembly to help them to do so by making a law that will make it easier for INEC to run transparent elections where your votes and my votes count and will be counted. So I am reasonably confident, but we will believe it fully when we see it, because there are vested interests, which do not want a transparent electoral system in Nigeria.
Okay, Prof, on that, obviously we have seen how the current government is going. Today, there is an argument that petrol has been increased from 100 and something to 212 naira today by PPRA. And suddenly we saw that NNPC, come out to say, oh, we haven't increased this. Yet, we've been told that there is deregulation that has happened within this sector. In your view, how do you think that the current government performs as regards to the economy? Obviously, that's your main area of focus.
Yes, of course. I think, the performance of this government on the Nigerian economy has been extremely weak. There is no question about it. The Nigerian economy has gone into 2 recessions within the past 5 years. Some may blame COVID for the last recession, but I don't think it's just about COVID. I think it's about the root causes that determine whether or not our economy is resilient, is strong enough to withstand something like COVID, although it's a natural disaster, a public health disaster. But, the management of Nigeria's economy, I've been very clear about it, is not competent, is not deeply informed by knowledge. We don't see the political will to make certain reforms that will make the economic environment better for businesses and for business people and for commerce and industry. And the reason, there are 2 things that are holding down the Nigerian economy. And number 1 is politics. Number 2 is politics. There are vested interests that benefit heavily from state control of a lot of economic activities in the market. And if you don't let those things go so that the market will set the price, including the price of petrol, but many other things as well, then, once the government controls anything, there will be arbitrage. Those who have access will use it to benefit themselves, whether it's foreign exchange, whether it's petrol, whether it's anything else. Nigeria is a very big country. We have a very big economy that can grow and create wealth for Nigerians. But I think the government of Nigeria is standing in the way of Nigerians becoming prosperous as citizens. That's my view.
So, but, obviously, we're basically saying that we've gone into 2 recessions, but many
Yes.
would argue that irrespective of what happened, that those recessions were bound to happen, that it wasn't as a result of government policy or maybe the way they manage the economy.
That is not true. The reason these recessions have happened, the main reason, is because of Nigeria's excessive reliance on crude oil as their main earner of foreign exchange. Over 90% of Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings come from crude oil. That's the bottom line. And unless it is fixed, and the only way to fix it is a fundamental constitutional restructuring of Nigeria so that it stops being a monoproduct economy, so that people stop fighting to control the federal government because of access to oil rents. That's what's killing the Nigerian economy. So it's a political economy issue. You see what I'm saying? That's the point. If you restructure Nigeria and every region is self-reliant and can generate its own revenues and make use of the resources that exist in its soil, without those resources being owned by the federal government and then given a monthly federal allocation to states, then Nigeria will begin to prosper economically, because economics is about incentives. Mm-hmm. Right now, there is no incentive for the Nigerian economy to structurally improve. Every incentive is for us to remain where we are. Today, the oil price is at about $70. Some people are celebrating. What a joke. When will we learn? This is a yo-yo. It goes up, it goes down, there is no stability. You cannot plan. So this is the problem. We are being led by people who cannot see the future and envision a different future, and people who have the political will to create that future. So that's the point. We have to be able to colonize the future. That is what Japan did. That is what Singapore has done. That is what China has done. It requires leadership. It requires political sagacity. It requires the ability to map out a vision to citizens and communicate that vision to them. And everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel in one direction. That's what creates development. It is first a political process and then an economic process.
Okay, Prof, I hear clearly what you're saying there. Obviously, these are the views that you've been espousing for so long, and it appears these views that you've been sharing normally falls on deaf ears. But recently, Prof, you were quoted as having praised the former president of Nigeria, that is, in the person of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, whom you said is the best president so far, even, I quote you there, even with all his faults and all. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. Now, it was Obasanjo's birthday on the 5th of March. Obasanjo is a former president of Nigeria. I am a public figure aspiring to be president of Nigeria. And I know, Nigeria's political history. And so I said that since 1999, I believe, and that's my personal opinion, and as a Nigerian, I'm entitled to have it, that he has been the best president. Why did I say so? I explained that Obasanjo was not tribalistic. Obasanjo had a composite view of Nigeria and tried to govern Nigeria from that perspective. And I explained why. I said all his career has been federal and international. So he did not think like, a tribal or some ethnic politician. He thought like a statesman. He worked hard. Did he have his faults? Yes, everybody knows those faults. And everybody knows that his 8 years in power were not perfect. But he worked very hard and improved the Nigerian economy in those 8 years. He canceled over $30 billion of foreign debt. He brought reforms in telecommunications that gave everybody their GSM. He retired all the politically exposed military officers. Immediately he came into office in 1999, which prevented another coup from having happened in Nigeria since 1999. I want you to remember that. And various other things. So So when I wasn't saying that Obasanjo is a perfect man. No, I was simply saying that relatively compared to the others, in my view, as a Nigerian, I thought he had performed best, period. That's what it is.
So basically your view is that Obasanjo is a detribalized Nigeria, a cosmopolitan ex-president, or when he was the president, he was a cosmopolitan president. Now,
yes. Now it doesn't stop him. Obasanjo is the Iboraowu, he's a Yoruba chief. You see, what people don't understand, I am the Ifeke Gowon of Nnewi Kingdom. Do you understand that? I hold a traditional title given to me by my Igwe. So I'm proud of being an Igbo man. I'm proud of my culture, but it doesn't stop me from thinking beyond my own ethnic cocoon. If I'm seeking the presidency of Nigeria, I have to think about every Nigerian and no matter where they come from, and how life can be better for them, including people from my part of the country. So that's the point I'm trying to make. The fact that he was a Nigerian didn't make him not to be a Yoruba man.
Okay, I understand. I mean, I understand that point very clearly here now. But let me basically just oppose that point that you just made now to the next question, which is, we talk about that. Everybody sees that Nigeria is undergoing ethnic tension at the moment. You hear it's. I mean, it's some people who say it's actually visible to the blind.
Absolutely.
This ethnic tension at the moment.
Absolutely.
Now, what in your view is the cause of this ethnic tension, and how do you think this should be resolved?
Very good question. You've come to the heart of the matter. There is one word that is the cause of the problems of Nigeria: injustice. Injustice. Nigeria is not a country where everyone is equal in reality. In reality, some people are more equal than others. And the lives of Nigerians increasingly do not matter to Nigeria's leadership. Some lives matter more than others. And this is the cause of the problem. It's a leadership failure. We don't have leadership in Nigeria that can see beyond, advancing narrow sectional interests. That's what politics in Nigeria is about. So we need now, one, a fundamental restructuring of Nigeria with a new constitution, not panel beating of the current constitution. It will not work because it is not a constitution that was produced by the people of Nigeria. So we need a constitution that was truly achieved through national consensus. Then the structural, rearrangement of Nigeria into regions, I prefer. It could be 12 regions, it could be 8, it could be 10, it could be 6 of the current geopolitical zones. But I believe that a regional-based restructuring of Nigeria will improve Nigeria's economy a lot.
But there is an argument against that, Prof.
I know the argument against it. You see, in life, you can't eat your cake and have it. So you have to make choices. You make strategic choices, and then you execute based on those strategic choices. Now, I'm not saying that a restructuring based on states cannot work. I am simply saying that I think a restructuring based on regions is better, because in economics, we have something that we call economies of scale. So when you do it under the regions, every region has enough of a market. Every region has enough talent to be able to manufacture and trade within the region and outside the region. So it leads to synergy. That's what I'm saying. When you have it in small states, some of the states in Nigeria today are not viable. Only 3 to 6 states in Nigeria today are viable. The rest cannot live without a federal account allocation. So when you continue to create this type of situation, then, economically, I don't think the result is going to be as pretty or as good as if you do it regionally. So it's a matter of political will. But there's an economic argument that underlies my argument for a regional approach to restructuring.
And which is?
Economies of scale. The advantage of economies of scale, that every region is big enough, has enough capacity, has enough of a market to produce and trade and create wealth within the region and then with other regions.
I had a guest last week who actually argued against this, and he said that when we had regions, let's take, for instance, the Eastern region. He gave example of the non-development of Akwa Ibom when it was under the old Eastern region. But that the moment states were created, you can see the level of development under Godswill or Babio, that the state started booming. That if you had a regional government, for instance, that there are where developments are today because they are states. They now, government is closer to the people. That regional government probably as it were in the before 1966. And his argument, he ended it with, if it worked, why did the military actually struck at that point? So meaning that regional government, in his view, doesn't seem to cut it. Would you agree?
Actually, no, I recognize the validity of the argument of those who want a restructuring on the basis of states. You see, so politics is a negotiation and a compromise. If the majority of Nigerians want a state-based restructuring, that is also okay by me. I'm simply giving an economic view. You understand what I'm saying? That I think the regional approach is better because Nigeria witnessed its best and most productive years when the country was structured along regional lines. There was competition between the regions. And so the regions actually were developing. Now, there is obviously the fact that maybe some pockets may not be as developed as the others. But given where we are today, I think that if you take a regional approach to restructuring, no particular part of any region will be disadvantaged, given where we are today. Now, you talked about if it was working. No, it was working. Why Nigeria became divided into states was a political decision, and we all know it. The 12-state structure was created largely to prevent the secession of Biafra. That's the point. Everybody knows that. So it's not an argument that would persuade me that states were created because the regions failed. No, the regions were successful. Every region, the Eastern region, the Western region, the Northern region, the Midwestern region, they were doing well. The problem was not the economics of Nigeria at the time. The problem was the politics. It was the parliamentary system that made the governance of the center very unstable. And that led to a crisis because some people were trying to achieve dominance at the expense of other people. So, and then of course the military people said, oh, there was corruption. It was all a misguided. If Nigeria had been allowed to be a democracy the way it was in the 60s, we would have resolved a lot of our problems by now.
Sure.
The military intervention took Nigeria backwards.
I think my personal view was that it still remains that the 1966 coup was in error. Anyway, that's my personal
I believe
view.
so too. I believe so. That's my view.
So if I come back to the ethnic tension that I spoke about, and you said that in your view that has to do with injustice, that what we need is fundamental restructuring. Then it begs the question how that could be the main issue here if we look at the conflict that is dealing with this Northwest today. As it were, we read that over 180 people were kidnapped last night in Kaduna, and invariably over 150 or thereabout has been rescued, and remaining only about 30. Now we see a lot of kidnapping in the Northeast and in the Northwest.
Yes.
It's, where is the injustice there? I mean, these are, the same people. No one is oppressing them. So where is the injustice?
Let me explain to you. A lot of people in the North have been disenfranchised, again, as has happened in many other parts of the country, by the political elite. The political elite is focused on itself. It's not really focused on the masses. And so, because the political elite is not focused on the masses of the North, and in many other parts of the country as well, but the difference is that in many other parts of the country, there is a stronger culture of economic self-sustenance. That's the only difference. But in the North, many of these people who have been dispossessed and disenfranchised have gone into crime. This is what is happening. So it is also injustice that has bred this escalation of terrorism and criminality. Now, and I don't make any excuse for Boko Haram. I don't know when you tell me that a Western education is a crime. For me, that is not a case. You're just off your rockers. So that's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm talking about all these kidnappers, all these bandits. That doesn't justify what they're doing, and they should be dealt with by the law. They should be brought to account. What has happened in the North is a complete failure of political leadership. Why? And a complete failure of national security as a result of the failure of political leadership. So we hear all kinds of allegations that the kidnapping and the banditry has become an industry, that people who are in the public space may be actually sharing this ransom money with these kidnappers and bandits. Tell me, that comes back to political leadership issues. The Nigerian political class has failed and failed completely. And that's why I say that Nigeria does not need another politician as its president. Nigeria needs a leader, a technocratic, visionary leader who can really work with the people to create prosperity. That's what's happening in the North. The absence of that is what is happening.
Okay, let me, before I get back to, I would move slightly to some certain type of question, but before I do that, I would quickly go back to the economy. Sure. And we've seen recently the CBN, Central Bank of Nigeria, where you, Professor, worked as a deputy governor of the central bank. Yes. And we've seen the ban of cryptocurrency trading in Nigeria. And recently, last week, we also saw the vice president of Nigeria, where he said that cryptocurrency, in his view, shouldn't have been banned. Rather, he advocates for more regulation. Now, people like me would then start asking, is the vice president, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, teaching the CBN governor his job? What is your view and your take on that?
Well, my views on cryptocurrency were very famous because I was interviewed and I gave exactly the same thing that the vice president said several weeks later. But of course, he's the vice president. So what he says gets more attention than what I say. But he was simply saying what I said earlier, that I don't think that, the approach of trying to ban the cryptocurrency exchanges and cryptocurrency trading from the banking system is necessarily the best way to go about it. I understand the fears of the central bank, but I felt that we can manage the risk and regulate that whole area because it is employing a lot, thousands of young Nigerians. Their lives depend on this. Now, what's the situation today? Let me make it clear. The central bank has not banned, cryptocurrency completely. Many people are trading or exchanging in cryptocurrency on what they call peer-to-peer exchanges. They just said that they don't want it inside the banking system, which the central bank controls. Because like I said, if I decide to give you my shirt and you decide to give me your shoe as an exchange, it is nobody's business. An exchange has taken place, and an economic one for that matter. So Nigerians have shown they have simply ignored what the central bank is saying, and they carry on with trading or exchanges or investments in crypto. So that's my view. My view aligns with that of the vice president on this matter, no question about it.
So, but again, you are, why I brought up this question is that many people, the moment the prof made that question, and some of us are thinking, who are actually behind those making these strategic and policy decisions? Why is it at this moment, it appears that the professor who is a lawyer appears to probably understand what, in terms of cryptocurrency and these regulations much better, or rather has a better approach than those that ought to know better than the professor himself?
Well, I think it's a matter of perspective. I don't think it's appropriate for me here to start dissecting the central bank and its leadership and whether it's competent or not. It's not for me to say so.
Well, my question wasn't on competence, but I can see there is an issue of camaraderie here where you don't want to talk about colleagues. Okay, I concede and I yield to that. And let me go back to slightly politics again.
Yeah.
As 2023 approaches, many are clamoring for Nigerian presidents of the Southeast extraction. Some are demanding for restructuring before the 2023 election, while some say 1999 constitution must be discarded and thrown into the bin. What do you think that the Igbos should seek for as 2023 comes nearer? We have people saying, no, give us a referendum. And others are saying, throw away the 1999 constitution. And some are saying, well, it's either a president of Nigeria from the Igbo extraction or there is nothing else.
Well, you remember that I told you that part of the main reason for Nigeria's current crisis is injustice. And one of those manifestations of injustice is the fact that since 1999, there has been a rotation of political power in Nigeria. Informally, it's not written in the constitution, but political power, even down to governorships and senators, and you find this principle of rotation in the Nigerian political space, where you come to a state and people will say, someone from this part of the state has been governor. The next time around, it should be someone from the other part of the state. So this is not just a matter of the presidency. So we've had the Southwest in 1999 with Olusegun Obasanjo. Then we had the Northwest with Yaradua. He unfortunately, regrettably passed on too soon. And then someone from the South became president. And then in 2015, someone from the North again became president. Now in 2023 is coming. I think it makes a lot of sense that in order to stabilize the country, there should be an opportunity for people from the Southeast as well to produce the next president of Nigeria. But I want to emphasize that what Nigeria needs most is competent leadership. But there is it's not competence, and equity and justice are not mutually exclusive. You can find a very competent Nigerian from the country which has not had the opportunity that other parts of the country have had. So that's my approach on the question of the Southeast and the presidency. The Nigerian citizens of the Southeast, I am from the Southeast, they have a right to aspire to be president of Nigeria. Igbos have voted for people from every other part of Nigeria since 1999. I don't see what's wrong if other parts of Nigeria vote for Igbos and choose which person from that part of the country can be Nigeria's best president. So that's on that. Do you have a question?
Yeah, as a follow-up question, I mean, the way you're talking about it now, may I ask you, are you going to run again for presidency in 2023?
Let me be very honest with you. I am thinking about it. I'm thinking very hard, and I'm evaluating the lessons from my first introductory attempt, because that was really an introduction to Nigeria. Somebody on Twitter said, somebody on Twitter has a name called Una Amaro Kamsi Kwado. You do not know how I'm preparing. I find that a very interesting name. Very interesting.
That's a good one.
Yes, exactly. So, we are thinking about it. We're strategizing, and I think at the right moment, I will say whether or not I'm going to do it. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, to a credit to you, about 3 weeks ago or thereabouts, you are among the very few Igbo politicians that spoke out against the military invasion of Olu in Imo State. And you took a swipe at you condemned it. And many people said, well, this man here condemning this invasion is not speaking like a politician. And I want to ask on behalf of those that made those comments, what informed your speaking up when Olu was invaded by the Nigerian army?
Because I hate injustice. I hate injustice. I don't care who the injustice affects. If you are unfair and unjust to a Fulani man or woman, or a Yoruba man or woman, or an Hausa man or an Ijaw man, I will stand up against that injustice. If you are unjust and unfair to an Igbo man or woman, I will also stand up against it. You see, it's a principle. It's not about ethnic irredentism for me. That is why, many people will note that when I ran for president in 2019, I did not run for president as an ethnic candidate. I ran as a Nigerian candidate for the Nigerian presidency, because that's my vision. So I spoke out against the invasion of Olu, because it's not right to always overreact to things that happen in one part of the country, whereas worse things are happening in another part of the country, and you're busy negotiating with them and paying them ransoms. But anytime there's any little akararam in the southeast, you see troops, you see the army, you see an overwhelming show of force.
And the python begins to dance.
Exactly. So this creates the impression that, citizens of Nigeria are under siege, or as if we are still under some sort of, that's not right. That's the reason. I just felt it was wrong. The reaction to what happened in Olu was just wrong. And I spoke out. I've told you, I'm not a politician. I am a leader. I've told you this before, and I want you to remember that about me. And I hate injustice. And I don't care who is the one meting out the injustice, and I don't care about who is the victim of the injustice. Injustice is injustice, and it's wrong, period.
Wow. Thank you very much for that straight answer, because I read your tweet yesterday, which is invariably almost about this time yesterday. You said, I hate injustice against anyone, Black or white, Christian or Muslim, Yoruba, Hausa, Fulani, or Igbo. I always have and always will do whatever I can to create a society in which we are all treated equally. Based on that tweet you tweeted yesterday,
yes,
my next question will be, what's your take on the issue as it concerns indigenous people of Biafra, called in short IPOB, and the cry for their self-determination pursuit?
Yes, that's a very good question, and I've been asked that a number of times. Let me preface it by making it very clear. I believe that Nigeria can work as a country. Nigeria is failing today because Nigeria lacks leadership. And our business, including the business of Igbos, should be to elect a leader that can make Nigeria work for all of us. So that's my first point. Number two, IPOB. IPOB exists because of injustice. IPOB is a cry for justice about what's happening in Nigeria. A group of people are feeling very marginalized and they're crying out. They are not the only one, mind you. I want you to know that there are similar movements in Yoruba land. There are similar movements in the Niger Delta. So there is a similar sentiment in the Middle Belt. So the IPOB is actually not peculiar in this sense. The IPOB is simply a reflection of the failure of political leadership in Nigeria and the increasing failure of Nigeria itself as a country. And that calls on us to rise up and fix it by making sure that we do justice to all Nigerians. So IPOB is a cry for justice, like I said, and the response to IPOB should not be the kind of response we are seeing. It should be a response that is a responsible and serious one. That is to go to the heart of the issue. What is the heart of the issue? The national question. What is Nigeria? Do we all agree on this country the way it currently is? If not, what do we want? Can we renegotiate Nigeria so that it can be more peaceful, more stable, and more just and fair to every Nigerian citizen? That's the national question, and that's the question some people are avoiding. And those people who avoid it, they will want to criticize IPOB and say, well, fine. I may not necessarily agree with every language of IPOB. I want to be very clear. I do not subscribe to language that denigrates, other people, other Nigerians. I just don't agree with that sort of language. You can believe what you believe. I have seen movements for secession in Spain. I've seen them in Canada. They engage in a mature way, pressing their demands. And those things go through a constitutional process. The best thing for the Igbos is to participate in Nigeria's politics. Come out and vote. Boycotting elections places you at a disadvantage. No question about it, because you are either at the table or you're on the menu. Remember what I said. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. If you take yourself out of the table, you're the one on the plate, and everybody will, dissect you with their fork and knife. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Engage. But IPOB is a cry for justice. There is a validity in many things they're saying and feeling, and it is the responsibility of the Nigerian leadership to address those issues, not to leave the issues and be playing the ostrich and condemning people who are legitimately aspiring for justice. Even in international law, the right to self-determination exists. We simply have to agree on whether or not it applies how we want to do it in Nigeria, period. So that's the way I look at these things. I believe in Nigeria, and I believe Nigeria can work, but Nigeria needs a different kind of leadership for this country to be able to work.
Okay, I know we are pressed with time now. We have about 10 minutes left before we finish this program. For those of you in this meeting, if you have any question for Prof, you kindly raise your hand. You'll be called upon. Your question is not going to be more than 30 seconds. Having said that, Prof, now, yes. If I come back to you, that means you are saying categorically here that assuming you become the president of Nigeria, you are willing and you'll be ready to negotiate with the Oduduwa secessionist group, the IPOB group, the Niger Delta militants, and maybe some groups of bandits, as it were. Is that what you're saying?
You have to make a distinction between political demands and criminality. You've got to make a distinction between those two things. I do not negotiate with criminals. I don't believe in that. No serious government negotiates with terrorists. So let me be very clear. All the negotiations and the appeasement of the bandits and the kidnappers in northern Nigeria, what has it brought to us? More kidnappings, because it has become a business model. It's become a business franchise. So it's the wrong thing, obviously. We have an armed forces. Why are they not able to put down these groups, but they're able to invade Olu Forest? That's my problem. You get the point? So,
yes.
So as president of Nigeria, why would you negotiate with terrorists and then people who are agitating for, whether they're agitating for ethnic secession or whatever, you call them terrorists, proscribe them, and send the military to where you think is their enclave. But people who are actual terrorists, killing people, kidnapping people, all sorts of things, you negotiate with them. The whole thing is upside down.
So what you're saying now, if I understand you very well, what you're saying is that the prescription of IPOB doesn't sit well with you.
Look, that's a decision for a government to make. But I'm saying what is good for the goose is good for the gander. You can decide to prescribe IPOB, but you can also decide if you want to be fair and just. Then the criminal headsmen, you can also call them terrorists and prescribe them. That's all I'm saying. It's your decision. You're the president. But if you want to prescribe A because you think that they are attacking the Nigerian state, why have you not prescribed B that is also perhaps even more effectively attacking the security of Nigeria? That's the issue. Now, if I were to be president, political agitations in this country will die a natural death. Let me be very clear, because I have the vision. I have the capacity to bring everybody to the table and say, look, and to manufacture consent on what Nigeria can be like and work for all of us. Therefore, drop your guns, drop your weapons, drop your agitation, because your fundamental, your basically what you're looking for, that justice you're looking for, you will get it. Everybody will get it. And Nigeria can therefore work for each and every one of us. That will be my approach as president. And I'll be fair to everybody, every part of Nigeria, no question, north, south, west, east.
I think that will be for me a fine place to leave it. So if you become the president, I hope you will be one of those that will be speaking to the public, and you come on this platform to speak to the people the way you've just done today. And
thank you.
I will leave you with this. I read something somebody said to you on Twitter, and I laughed. That was actually yesterday going through. Okay. He said, you are the man with the master plan and the plan to implement the plan.
Well, that's true. That's something I said when I was running for president in 2019. So the person was quoting me, and I said,
okay,
I am the man with a plan and a plan to execute the plan, which is the fact, remains the fact. You know, Nigerians, unfortunately, let me say this in closing before I take any questions. It's very sad that Nigerians go and vote for people who have stolen their commonwealth and used your money and mine to build, quote unquote, what they call structures. We worship those people, but the people who are making a sacrifice, who are putting themselves out with ideas, with a vision, with the passion to make the lives of the common man better, we do not support those people. We worship political parties that can rig and, quote unquote, win elections, but they cannot govern. Instead of saying, and that's where we should be going, let's select a candidate, person, not party. Nigeria's democracy is not mature. Our political parties do not represent any real philosophy. They're just vehicles to acquire power. So we should be looking at who can do the job and vote for whatever platform that person is on, not to say, oh, he's not in APC or PDP, therefore he cannot win. We want to join a bandwagon, but it is essentially a bandwagon to nowhere. 21 years of democracy, APC and PDP, no water, no light. That's the verdict.
Well, I think I don't want to get back to the book, to my book of lamentations. I mean, obviously, you've just said now what we all know, the system is not working, and it appears that even the people, the downtrodden, somehow have come to the point of allowing and aiding their oppressors, that men with content, with grammatars in between their skulls are neglected, that they do not vote for them. Rather, they keep going back to the people that oppress them. Now, in closing here, Professor, I would then ask, bearing this in mind, that you know what the thinking of the people, bearing in mind, and you've had this experience in 2019, what do you think within these 2.5 years remaining will change? How do you think anything will change drastically? And if yes, how do you think this change is going to occur that we will get it right in 2023 then?
Let me tell you the change I hope for. The change I hope for is a change in the mindset of Nigerians themselves. I do not have too many high hopes that the Nigerian political class will suddenly change and become angels in the last 2 years. If anything, by mid-2021, the governance of this country will come to an effective halt. And everything is all about politics of 2023. We know it. But what I hope will change is our mindset, yours and mine, about who we elect in 2023 as the president of Nigeria. Who we elect as a governor, who we elect as senators, who we elect as House of Reps, and so on and so forth. We should go for vision, competence, capacity. Forget about the political party. It's just a platform. Let me just be very frank with you. It's just a platform at this time in Nigeria. So if Nigerians make that change in their own mindset, hopefully in 2023, they'll be able to elect a president who supports justice and equity, a president who has the capacity to reform Nigeria's economy and create prosperity for you and me, a president who can secure Nigeria's borders from terrorists and bandits and all sorts of criminals, a president who says, I don't care whose ox is God, every Nigerian's life matters, all Nigerians are equal, and our government, my government, will protect you and assure your welfare. That is the decision that Nigerians have to make. It's a decision for each and every one of us. We can do it if we really try. I think that was Jimmy Clay.
Thank you.
We can do it if we really try.
Thank you very much. That's it.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
That's a fine place to leave it. Let me quickly take a question from Godson Ibagwa. Gustin, you have 30 seconds for your question. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Prof, thank you very much for your words. Whoever that has listened to you from the start will know that you are the right material. You have the right policies, you have the right knowledge, fine. But there is something I find I'm trying to understand how to solve. Everybody speaks about this 1999 Constitution. Everybody speaks about how to amend it. We know that those who benefit more today from this constitution are a majority. The National Assembly is the only body charged with this amendment.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's going to be difficult for us to achieve that if you are outside power. So my first question is this: how can we achieve this, knowing these very stark realities? There is no way.
Yeah, that is why voter apathy is a no-no for 2023. All of us must come out and vote. And we must vote for people who believe that Nigeria needs a new constitution that is a constitution made by the people. Some people are hoping for the restructuring of Nigeria before 2023. Well, good luck to them. What I think we need to do is to elect a man or woman as president in 2023 who will initiate the proper restructuring of Nigeria, who will initiate the process of a constituent assembly that can represent all of Nigeria's ethnic nationalities and all the groups, and we discuss and agree on the new Nigeria we want. And we take that consensus to the National Assembly to pass a new constitution. That's the way I think we should go about it, practical, as we say. Yes.
Thank you very much, Prof. So I'll call the next person, Habat Soweminmo. Habat Soweminmo, kindly unmute yourself and quickly ask your question, 30 seconds. If Habat, okay, yes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Prof, thank you for holding this session. Much appreciated. Two questions to my mind. Number one, what is evident to us now?
Loud, if you don't mind.
Can you speak up, please, and make it snappy?
Okay, just a minute, please. The first question is, it is evident to us now that the massive and deliberate miseducation, undereducation of the northern youths in Nigeria for the past God knows how many decades has resulted in poverty levels that are shocking Nigeria. And it has resulted into the mass existence of all these young men and women who have no skills, who have no competencies and essentially no future, and become the political cannon fodder that is used by politicians. They have become a resource for Boko Haram and so many other insecurities going on in Nigeria. How do you intend to approach resolution for that kind of situation, being the constitution maybe give or take 8 to 10 million youths in the north who are human capital, but however, yes, that's number one question.
Okay, let me answer that question. It's a very
sorry, we can only take that question. Go ahead, Prof.
Okay, that's a very important question. If I were to become president of Nigeria, the first task is to secure northern Nigeria, to secure the people, Nigerians, our brothers and sisters who come from the northern part of this country, secure them from Boko Haram, secure them from all sorts of terrorists, bandits, criminals. Without security, the economy cannot thrive. The reason the North is the economic basket case of Nigeria today is precisely because of the very heightened levels of terrorism there. No businessman will want to go and set up an industry in a place where terrorists can come and kidnap people any time of day or night. So the first thing is to secure the North. That will be my priority as the president. We must secure northern Nigeria, because if northern Nigeria collapses and fails, it means that Nigeria itself is not viable. Once we then secure the North, we go into a program of rehabilitation of the youth in that part of the country, and every part of the country, with skills that can now be used to service industries. We will attract economic investors to come and begin to invest. And then we will prepare the youth as human capital that can be able to work those industries to produce prosperity for Nigerians who come from that part of the country. We will do the same in every part of the country as well. But there is a certain urgency in the North today because the North is failing. And if the North fails, Nigeria fails.
Thank you very much. And I think we have less than 3 minutes. So please make it very snappy. Let me take Don Chinedu Oji. Please, Chinedu, just 30 seconds.
Good evening, Prof. Good evening, Mazi. Prof, first of all, thanks very much for the the information you've shared with us today and the vision. But I think there's on your last comment, it goes just beyond securing the northern Nigeria, because I think there's a fundamental gap that the elites in the north are benefiting from the lack of political orientation and education in that region. Therefore, you will quickly realize that you have more than a big obstacle, against you or any government that will come into Nigeria that wants to change the status quo. So
let me answer you. Let me answer you.
Prof, hold on. I just want you to do the answering, and that will be your closing remark as well, because we are running out of time.
Okay.
Samuel Dada, please, your question, 20 seconds, please.
Okay, good evening. I just want to know, how will it rehabilitate the Northerners Amaji rigs that have no stable electricity, and we don't have the national biometric database of Nigerians? How can you go about it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very straightforward question. Prof, now over to you.
The first thing I would do as president of Nigeria is to secure Nigeria's borders. That's number one. Once we secure the borders, then all of us are inside. We begin to look at ourselves. We stop the terrorists from attacking us. And then we move into the business of new schools, new skills for the Almajiri children. You made a point about the political elite in the north, which is actually not very different from the political elite everywhere else, including even in my own part of the country. That the Nigerian political elite are in politics for politicians, of politicians, by politicians. They do not care about the people. And that is why we should stop returning this political class to power every 4 years, just because they have, quote unquote, structure. You're rewarding failure when you do that. And as a leader of Nigeria, if I were to have that opportunity, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I will anticipate all these obstacles that have faced some other people who tried to do something similar, but their plan was not holistic enough. They did not have the vision. I will come with the capacity, the vision, and the execution, the risk management, the strategy. All these things are part of it. The ability to mold and build consensus. I will hold town halls in every part of the country every 3 months, one-on-one dialogue. And that's how you build consensus, so that the people in the north, the people themselves, begin to desire, to want, and to be part of the solution. And when that is the case, the political elite will have to follow and fall in line. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. That's exactly 8 o'clock on the dot here in Nigeria, and it's a very fine place to leave it. I think we do not have, I can see many people still raising their hands. We do not have enough time. 1 hour is not enough to do justice to some of these things. Prof, I think you have to promise us that you're going to come back again, because there are a lot of questions. Back. Oh, that's very good. You'll be back. That's hasta la vista. So,
absolutely.
As Arnold Schwarzenegger said. It's been a very interesting conversation with you, Prof, in the last 1 hour. Thank you very much for joining us here at Njenje Media TV. My name still remains Mazi Tochukwu Ezoke. Professor, once more, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I hope next time you will join us and we'll have more deeper conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mazi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Bye-bye.